When you think about the sheer mechanics of massive growth, whether you happen to be launching a new tech startup from your garage or trying to build a global lifestyle brand.
Right. Or even just attempting to organize a local neighborhood coalition.
Yeah, exactly. There is this incredibly pervasive, just underlying cultural assumption that more is inherently better. I mean, the metrics we obsess over are universally quantitative.
Oh, absolutely. You want the maximum number of eyeballs on your product.
Right. You want the highest possible head count at your events. You want the line stretching out the door around the block and, trending on social media.
It is the default setting for how we measure the health of any modern enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
The assumption is just that scale equals success
Yeah.
and visibility equals validation. I mean, if you have a crowd, you are winning. If your numbers are stagnating, your organization is dying.
But imagine you hit a wall in your growth phase, right? And you hire a highly sought-after organizational consultant.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They hand you their definitive, step-by-step master manual on how to scale your community to astronomical heights. You crack open the spine, completely ready to absorb the secrets of viral marketing and rapid crowd acquisition.
You want the cheat codes.
Exactly. And the very first thing written on page one, like the foundational premise of this entire growth manual, is a dire, flashing red warning.
Which is wild.
He says, beware of the crowd. The crowd is dangerous. The crowd will actively destroy your purpose.
It immediately forces a cognitive dissonance. I mean, you approach the material looking for an accelerator, and the author just hands you a massive set of brakes.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that subversion is exactly what we are dissecting today on the deep dive. We are looking at a 2017 text written by Oki Chijioke titled We Can't Spell C-A-R-Arch Without You.
And just to look at that title for a second, you see the play on words.
Right, the U in the word church is physically missing from the cover.
Which is a highly deliberate typographic choice. It signals right from the start that this document, while ostensibly about building a massive, towering organizational structure, is fundamentally obsessed with the microscopic role of the individual within that structure.
Yeah, and as we dig into this, it is crucial to understand how we're approaching the material. I mean, for you listening, this text is heavily steeped in religious language and scriptural references, which makes total sense given it's a manual for church growth.
Right, it's literally what the book is about.
But we are looking at this purely as an architectural blueprint. We are stripping away the theological debates to impartially examine the psychological, motivational, and logistical frameworks the author proposes.
We aren't endorsing any specific theology here.
Exactly. Think of this as dissecting the operational playbook of a highly successful, intensely dedicated community. Like, how do they handle scale? How do they manage human ego? How do they build loyalty?
And approaching it as an operational playbook reveals an incredibly rich, sophisticated text. What is so striking is how it seamlessly marries these profound, ancient spiritual metaphors with highly systematic, almost ruthlessly efficient logistical frameworks for community management.
Right, because the central paradox we just talked about, this idea that a growth manual begins by warning you against the multitude, is where the text plants its flag.
It really does.
The stated purpose of the book is, quote, to be a church where all grow to maturity. It wants a massive, thriving community. Yet the opening pages aggressively warn the reader against what the author calls a man-made growth style, the world's way.
And the defining characteristic of that flawed world's way style is the blind pursuit of the generic crowd. The author is drawing a very sharp line between scale and substance.
Yeah, and to illustrate this, the text reevaluates one of the most famous biblical narratives, which is Jesus feeding the 5,000.
Right. Culturally, that event is almost universally interpreted as this triumphant moment of provision and mass appeal.
It's the ultimate successful event.
Exactly. But the author pivots and focuses entirely on the aftermath.
And the aftermath is bleak. I mean, the author points out that the very next day, this massive multitude came tracking Jesus down again. But they weren't there because they were transformed by the message.
No, they weren't there to contribute to the community at all.
They were there because they wanted another free lunch. They wanted the spectacle to continue.
The text explicitly warns the reader. It says they were no more interested in the word, but in the miracles. Be careful of the multitude.
Wow.
The core organizational insight here is that a crowd gathered solely by spectacle is fundamentally fickle. They operate as consumers, demanding constant entertainment or provision, rather than acting as stakeholders invested in the organization's mission.
But the text doesn't just stop at saying crowds are fickle. It goes a step further and argues that a massive, unstructured crowd actually becomes a physical and logistical obstacle to the core mission.
It creates a barrier.
Yeah, the author provides this rapid-fire list of case studies from the text to prove this, and these examples focus heavily on individuals whose access was physically blocked by the sheer density of the multitude.
It's a really interesting way to frame it.
You have Zacchaeus, right, a guy who was physically short and couldn't even see the leader he was trying to follow. He had to literally climb a tree just to bypass the massive crowd.
Right.
You have blind Bartimaeus, whose voice was completely drowned out by the roar of the multitude, forcing him to scream desperately just to get a second of attention.
Because the noise of the crowd is so overwhelming.
Exactly. You have the woman with the issue of blood, who had to engage in a physical struggle to press her way through a crushing mob. And then, like the most extreme example, the paralyzed man whose friends literally had to dismantle the roof of a house and lower him through the ceiling.
Just because the crowd blocking the front door was completely impenetrable.
Right. Look at the structural argument being made here. In a standard corporate growth model, having a crowd so dense that people cannot get through the front door is the ultimate dream.
Oh, yeah. It implies infinite demand. It's the Apple Store on iPhone launch day.
Yes. But this text reframes that exact scenario as a catastrophic operational failure.
And what's fascinating here is why they view it as a failure. Because most event planners would kill for a line around the block.
So how does the text explain that?
Because if the core mission of your organization is the transformation and care of the individual, which the text defines as growing to maturity, then a crowd that prevents a hurting person from accessing help is actively destroying your mission.
Oh, wow.
The noise of the multitude prevents the leadership from hearing the specific, granular needs of the individual. The organization becomes a victim of its own unchecked mass.
That reframing is fascinating. It instantly makes me think about modern internet dynamics and the pursuit of virality. Achieving sudden viral social media fame is the exact modern equivalent of the multitude showing up for the miracle.
It really is.
Someone posts a shocking video or a funny dance, and overnight they have 1 million followers.
But the engagement is incredibly shallow.
Exactly. Those followers aren't invested in the creator's long-term journey. They are looking for a quick dopamine hit, a quick miracle. The second the creator attempts to pivot to meaningful, substantive content, that multitude vanishes.
Because they were consumers of the spectacle, not community members.
Right. Contrast that with building a highly dedicated, gated community like a Patreon. A creator might only have 1,000 people in their Patreon, but those individuals are deeply invested. They are stakeholders.
And the author argues that the only way to build that deeper stakeholder-level connection is to adopt what they call a servanthood mindset.
Which is a direct assault on the ego of the leader.
Completely. To truly build a sustainable community, the leader must entirely divorce their personal sense of worth from the sheer size of the room they are speaking to.
And to really drive a spike through the ego of the reader, the author abruptly pivots from biblical case studies to some intensely dark historical cautionary tales. This section of the book is jarring.
It takes a really sharp turn.
Yeah, it brings up Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Hannibal.
The author utilizes these military conquerors as the ultimate avatars of unchecked, ego-driven expansion. The text describes this as a godless man's quest for glory.
And the imagery is incredibly graphic and bleak. The text points out that Alexander the Great conquered the known world, wept because there were no territories left to dominate, and died completely unsatisfied at the age of 33 after a life of debauchery.
Right.
It describes Julius Caesar literally dipping his garments in the blood of 1 million conquered subjects, only to be violently assassinated because his blinding quest for glory overrode his logic and reason.
And then Hannibal.
Yeah, Hannibal, who supposedly committed suicide after filling 3 entire bushels with the gold rings stripped from the fingers of conquered kings.
By invoking these specific historical figures, the author is deliberately linking the insatiable desire for a massive crowd to severe psychological rot and eventual self-destruction.
It's a heavy warning.
The text states, quote, "Temporary success may crown the efforts of a godless man's quest for glory, but it will not bring satisfaction. Looking for fame, fortune, and multitudes will always end in despondence."
It is a brutal psychological leveling. The text is looking the ambitious leader dead in the eye and saying, if you're trying to build this organization just to feel important, to feed your own ego, you will end up hollow, miserable, and eventually destroyed by the very empire you built.
It acts as a necessary purgative. Before the text will give you the tools to grow, it demands that you kill your desire to be famous.
But this introduces a massive operational paradox, right? I mean, I understand the psychological need to kill the ego, but practically speaking, if your mandate is to build an organization that reaches the entire world, but you are simultaneously commanded to ignore the generic crowd and actively avoid the allure of the multitude,
Right.
how do you actually execute that?
It's a huge contradiction on the surface.
Yeah, like how does the text propose we actually filter out the noise of the multitude while still growing?
To navigate that exact paradox, the text argues that the leader requires a highly specialized, almost unnatural type of vision. You cannot operate at the ground level where the crowd is crushing you. You have to elevate.
Okay, and this is where we get into the core operational framework of the book. The author introduces what they call the PBP vision. That acronym stands for Pray, Bible meaning intensive study, and Preach meaning evangelism or outward outreach.
Pray, Bible, preach.
PBP.
Right. But to explain how a leader is supposed to process this PBP vision, the text leans heavily into a very specific central metaphor, which is the eagle.
The text draws on familiar poetic imagery, the idea of mounting up with wings like eagles. But it completely strips away the poetry and applies a rigid, mechanical interpretation to the biology of the bird. It really does. It's almost scientific in its approach. The text claims that in the system of the eagle, vision is the supreme asset. It states that the eagle possesses both microscopic and telescopic eyes.
Right, dual lenses.
Yeah. The book describes how an eagle uses its telescopic vision to spot tiny prey from astonishing heights, specifically sighting 40,000 feet in the air.
Which, just purely from an ornithological standpoint, is a staggering altitude.
Right. I mean, commercial airliners cruise at 40,000 feet. We are talking about an eagle operating in the stratosphere.
Yeah, holding its breath.
Exactly. But the metaphor continues. The text claims that while remaining at that massive altitude, the eagle somehow shifts its eyes into a microscopic mode, mathematically magnifying the image of the prey on the ground to calculate the perfect trajectory before it ever begins its descent.
Obviously, an eagle does not possess literal microscopic magnifying lenses in its corneas.
No.
Nor is it hunting from the cruising altitude of a Boeing 747. But the biological accuracy is entirely irrelevant. Functionally, as an organizational leadership metaphor, it is devastatingly effective.
Explain how that translates to the human leader, though.
It encapsulates the dual requirement of effective executive management. The telescopic vision represents the leader's absolute necessity to maintain the massive, overarching goal.
The big picture.
Right. You have to be able to pull back and see the entire landscape of your organization's mission from 40,000 feet. You must know the ultimate destination. But, as any failed startup founder will tell you, you cannot execute a plan from the clouds.
You can see the target, but you can't catch it from up there.
Precisely. To actually execute, you must possess the microscopic vision. You must have the ability to flawlessly zoom in and obsess over the minute, daily, granular habits and logistical details that will inch you closer to the goal.
And in the framework of this text, those microscopic daily habits are the relentless execution of PBP Pray, Bible, Preach. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Think about the immense cognitive load this metaphor is demanding from a human being. A leader is supposed to hold the grand, world-changing vision in their mind, while simultaneously obsessing over the microscopic details of organizing a Tuesday night small group meeting or writing a single outreach pamphlet.
It's an incredible amount of mental gymnastics.
The context switching alone would be paralyzing. Zooming in and out constantly between the grand vision and the tiny details sounds like it could give a leader whiplash. How does the author suggest stabilizing this? Because if you're just bouncing violently between the clouds and the dirt, you're going to crash.
Your critique hits on the exact vulnerability of visionary leadership, and the text implicitly recognizes this danger. Unanchored vision leads to madness. To prevent that psychological whiplash, the PBP framework establishes a deeply rooted grounding mechanism.
Which is the first P.
Right. The very first step of the framework, prayer, is not treated as a passive, polite ritual. It is engineered to be the leader's psychological and operational anchor.
And the text makes it clear that this isn't about closing your eyes and having a quiet moment of zen. It frames this first P with a very aggressive warning. If you don't pray, you become prey.
It immediately elevates the stakes. The text frames prayer as active defensive warfare against the internal ego and the external distractions of the multitude.
And before the leader is allowed to engage in any actual community building, before they make a single outward move, the text recommends they embark on a 3-day fast.
3 days.
3 entire days of zero food, just starting right out of the gate with extreme physical deprivation.
It is an extreme measure, but the text is meticulously careful to clarify the psychological intent behind this deprivation. It explicitly notes that fasting is not a hunger strike to force God's hand.
I found that phrasing so revealing, not a hunger strike, because so often human nature treats sacrifice as a transactional bargaining chip. Like, I starved myself for 3 days, therefore the universe owes me a successful organization.
Exactly. The text shuts down that transactional mindset immediately. Instead, it explains that the fast is designed to subdue the flesh and make the individual hypersensitive to their internal direction.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, consider the physiological reality of a 3-day fast. You are stripping away the constant, low-level dopamine hits we get from food, comfort, and routine. You are deliberately forcing your body and mind into a state of acute vulnerability.
It is a profound neurological reset.
It is. Before you take on the massive, inherently ego-tempting task of building a community where you will inevitably face the dangerous allure of the multitude, you force yourself to confront your own physical weakness.
You're reminding yourself that you are human.
Right. It guarantees that the leader begins the journey from a foundation of intense humility rather than hubris. You cannot believe you are a god when your stomach is screaming for a piece of bread.
It essentially clears the cache of your ego. You are starting with a blank slate. But what I found incredibly compelling about this section on prayer is how the author drops the authoritative tone and gets deeply vulnerable about their own struggles with this exact concept.
Yeah, the childhood anecdote.
The author shares this story about growing up in a small town where life felt chaotic, like a game of chance. One evening as a child, he was suddenly asked to open a gathering with a prayer.
And he experienced the catastrophic failure of communication.
He totally froze. The text says the only prayer he knew was this rote, rigidly memorized script he had learned elsewhere. So under pressure, he just regurgitated it, even though the words had absolutely nothing to do with the specific occasion or the people gathered in the room.
It didn't fit the context at all.
Right, and the author states that it created such a, quote, great embarrassment that it shut me up for a long time in the place of prayer. It literally traumatized his ability to vocalize his vision.
It is a remarkably raw and relatable story, and it serves a distinct purpose in the manual. The text is actively trying to deprogram the reader from the instinct to rely on performative action. That childhood rote prayer is the essence of performative leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is reciting lines without understanding the underlying mechanics simply because you think it is what the audience expects to hear.
It is exactly like trying to pass a foreign language exam by memorizing 3 specific phonetic sentences without ever bothering to learn the actual grammar, syntax, or vocabulary.
Right, you're just parroting sounds.
Exactly. As long as the examiner asks you the exact question you prepared for, you look like a genius. But the second you are put on the spot with a novel situation, like the author was at that gathering, the illusion shatters completely. You have no idea how to actually construct a thought in that language.
That is the perfect analogy. And to solve this, the text introduces a structural framework to teach the grammar of prayer. It introduces the ACTS acronym to replace rote memorization with intentional constructive thought patterns.
Right, the ACTS framework, ACTS. The A stands for adoration, which the text defines as the act of worship.
Okay, starting with perspective.
Then C is for confession, which involves active repentance from the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. T is thanksgiving, the act of showing deep gratitude. And finally, S is supplication, which is the avenue to intercede and ask for things for others and for yourself.
If you analyze this framework through a psychological lens, it is a highly strategic cognitive behavioral exercise. By forcing communication to flow in the specific sequence of adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and then supplication, the leader is methodically prevented from acting on selfish impulses.
Because if you just went straight to supplication, you'd just be rattling off a list of demands. Give me a bigger building, give me 1,000 followers, make me famous.
Exactly. The sequence is a safeguard. You have to start with perspective adoration, recognizing that you are not the center of the universe. Then you must acknowledge your own flaws and operational blind spots confession.
You clean your own house first.
Right. Then you must recognize the assets and progress you already possess, thanksgiving. Only after you have walked through those 3 ego-destroying steps are you permitted to ask for what you need, supplication. And even then, the text demands you intercede for others before yourself.
It is a structured empathy-building algorithm, and the text pairs this with a specific prayer guide for the spirit of discipleship to direct this newly learned grammar.
And what does that guide target?
The targets it sets for the leader are fascinatingly communal. It asks the leader to pray that they love God, certainly, but it immediately pivots to asking the leader to pray that they love their neighbors as the Good Samaritan did, to pray that their love translates into tangible action, ministering to a hurting world, to pray that their organization will be a place that welcomes everyone.
Now consider the internal logic of the text here, because this might seem contradictory at first glance. Earlier, the text violently warned against the crowd and told the leader to avoid the multitude. But here, the operational guide demands that they actively build a community that welcomes everyone.
Right.
How do you welcome everyone while avoiding the multitude?
It comes down to intention and structure, doesn't it?
Precisely. The distinction lies in the architecture of the gathering. You do not build a flashy spectacle designed to attract a massive random crowd of passive consumers. Instead, you build a rigorous, highly empathetic community of individuals who are structurally prepared to welcome anyone who comes seeking genuine transformation.
I see.
The ACTS prayer framework ensures the leader's internal psychology is calibrated to build the latter, not the former.
Okay, so the foundation is laid. The leader has hit the reset button on their ego through a 3-day fast. They have learned the grammar of empathy through the ACTS framework. Their internal microscopic vision is dialed in.
They are right.
But an organization cannot exist as a single person sitting alone in a room. Eventually, you have to actually involve other human beings. So how does this community physically scale up?
This transition brings us to the operational engine of the manual, the second P in the PBP framework, which stands for Bible, or the intensive study of the text. This is where the book completely shifts gears from individual psychology to hard structural logistics.
It details exactly how the community achieves physical, cellular growth.
Yes.
And it roots this section in a verse from 2 Timothy 2.15, which commands the reader to study to show thyself approved, rightly dividing the word of truth. But the really interesting case study it pulls is the story of the Berean Christians from the book of Acts.
The Bereans serve as a vital archetype for the kind of community member this text is trying to engineer. The text notes that when the Apostle Paul and Silas arrived in Berea and brought them the message, the Bereans were described as more noble than others.
And why were they more noble?
Because they didn't just blindly accept what this charismatic, famous leader was telling them. They searched the scriptures daily to verify if the things they were hearing were factually and logically true.
They were fact-checking the Apostle Paul. I actually love that. Most organizational growth manuals rely heavily on cultivating a cult of personality around the founder. But this text actively subverts that.
It really does.
It uses the Bereans to tell the reader, blindly following a charismatic leader is a flaw, not a feature. You have to investigate the raw data for yourself.
It demands critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And to facilitate that level of rigorous, independent investigation, the book provides a highly practical 4-step framework for effective study. When analyzing any text or parable, the member must ask 4 questions: what, when, why, and how.
And the text defines these very specifically. First, what lesson is this passage teaching me? Second, when can I use this passage in my life?
Right, making it immediate.
Exactly. Third, why is this lesson important to me? And fourth, how can I tangibly apply this lesson to my current situation?
Notice what this framework does. It takes highly abstract ancient theological concepts and violently forces them into immediate, practical, modern application. But the ultimate goal of this intense study is not just intellectual stimulation.
What's the deeper goal?
The text explicitly outlines the psychological objective, stating, quote, "Through the study of the Word of God, you gain control of your mind by its renewal."
It draws a straight line between study, thought, and behavior. The text argues that if you cannot command your thoughts to dwell on specific constructive things, you lose command of your physical actions. The exact quote is, "Whatever controls your mind controls your action."
This is foundational cognitive behavioral theory deployed as spiritual discipline. You rigorously control the inputs, the structured study, which fundamentally alters the cognitive processing patterns, which ultimately dictates the behavioral outputs of the individual.
But knowing how to study is just theory. What makes this section truly mind-blowing is the physical, non-negotiable structure the book mandates for this study to actually take place in the real world.
Yes, the structural secret of the entire manual.
The text mandates that these Bible study classes utilize a specific Jesus reflection guide to break the ice and track individual growth. But the absolute golden rule, the load-bearing pillar of this entire organizational architecture, is the strict regulation of class size.
It's a very specific number.
The text emphatically, almost aggressively states in all caps, the unit was made of maximum of 6 to 12 people per class, and it establishes a hard structural law. The moment a class hits 12 members, it must immediately split into 2 separate units of 6 people each.
The sheer logistical brilliance of this 6 to 12 split is the most profound insight in the text. To understand why, we have to look back at the very beginning of our deep dive. What was a primary existential threat the author warned against on page 1?
The multitude, the massive impersonal crowd where individuals get lost in the noise and become passive consumers.
Exactly. By instituting a hard cap of 12 people per unit, the text makes it structurally, mathematically impossible for a multitude to ever form internally. It engineers forced intimacy.
Think about the group dynamics of that. If you are in a room with 50 people, you can sit in the back row, look at your phone, nod occasionally, and absolutely no one will know if you are actually engaged or struggling. You can hide.
You're just a face in the crowd.
Right. But in a room of 6 to 12 people, you cannot hide. You cannot be a passive consumer of a spectacle because there is no spectacle. You are known. You are forced to participate.
It completely eliminates the phenomenon of social loafing.
It is the exact same logic behind Jeff Bezos's famous 2-pizza rule at Amazon.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, Bezos instituted a rule in the early days of the company that if a team could not be fully fed by 2 pizzas, that team was too big. Once a group exceeds that 10 to 12 person threshold, the mathematical lines of communication become too tangled, accountability dissolves, and efficiency plummets. The author of this text arrived at the exact same conclusion for community building.
Furthermore, the forced division at 12 members acts as an automatic, built-in engine for continuous leadership development. Consider the mechanics of it. You start with a group of 6. Through outreach, it grows to 12. The rule dictates it must split.
So you divide it in half.
Now you have 2 groups of 6.
Right.
But critically, you now need a second teacher, a second facilitator, a second host.
Ah, I see. By constantly fracturing and multiplying, the organization creates a permanent leadership vacuum.
Exactly. It forces the organization to constantly pull new people out of the seating area and push them into leadership roles. It prevents the original founder from bottlenecking the growth, and it prevents stagnation at the top of the hierarchy.
It is literally the biological process of cellular mitosis. A single cell absorbs nutrients, grows, and divides into 2 identical cells. Those 2 grow and divide into 4. It is a mechanism for exponential, infinite organic growth that never, ever loses its fundamental microscopic intimacy.
And the text doesn't just hope this mitosis happens naturally. It pairs this cellular division with a highly specific programmatic quota. The each one get 1 in 3 month program, or E1G1I3M.
Which means every single member of the organization is explicitly tasked with bringing in 1 new person every single quarter.
Which mathematically fuels the continuous division of the small groups.
But let's pause here, because this brings up a massive operational and psychological hurdle. If the inward growth is this structured, if it's this intensely intimate and protected from the generic multitude, how do they handle the outward push to get new people?
That's the friction point.
Yeah, because standing in front of a congregation and commanding everyone to go get 1 person in 3 months is easy. Actually doing it requires an individual to overcome a mountain of social anxiety, fear of rejection, and the sheer awkwardness of cold pitching a stranger on a deeply personal belief system.
It's terrifying for most people.
How does this framework force an inherently inward-looking, comfortable, intimate small group to turn around and face the hostile multitude?
That tension brings us to the third and final part of the PBP framework preach, or evangelism. And the text approaches this immense psychological friction by deploying a 2-pronged strategy. First, it builds an overwhelming psychological imperative to shatter the members' social anxiety.
Okay.
Second, it provides a highly structured, almost corporate logical argument to ensure the interaction doesn't devolve into a chaotic debate.
Let's look at that first prong, building the psychological imperative. The book roots this mandate in the Great Commission, where Jesus tells the original 11 apostles to go into all the world and preach. But what I appreciate is that the author doesn't gloss over how insane that request was.
No, they lean right into it.
The text asks the reader to put themselves in the shoes of those 11 guys standing on a hill being told to conquer the globe. The author asks, quote, What would be our reaction? Impossible, incredible, absurd.
The author validates the reader's feeling of being overwhelmed. But to combat that paralysis, the text relies on cultivating a profound, almost crushing sense of internal duty. It references Isaiah saying, "Here am I, send me."
And it leans on the Apostle Paul.
Heavily.
Yeah.
Specifically Paul in the book of Romans, where Paul states, "I am a debtor, both to the Greeks and to the barbarians."
Framing it as a debt is a massive paradigm shift.
It is the fulcrum of their motivation. If you view outreach as doing a favor for someone, you will quit the moment they reject you.
Right, because you're like, hey, I tried to do you a favor, whatever.
Exactly. But if you view yourself as a debtor, meaning you owe the world this message because you have freely received its benefits, then rejection doesn't absolve you of the debt.
And then the text drops this incredibly stark, heavy quote in the Soul Winner's Guide section. It quotes a man named Oswald J. Smith, who says, quote, "No one has the right to hear the gospel twice, while there is someone who hasn't heard it once."
The psychological weight of that single sentence is immense.
It is genuinely heavy. No one has the right to hear it twice. Think about what that does to a person sitting comfortably in their third Bible study of the week.
By internalizing that quote, the text brilliantly transforms the act of outreach from a voluntary extracurricular activity into a blaring, urgent moral emergency.
It weaponizes empathy.
Yes, it weaponizes empathy to overcome social anxiety. When a member of this organization is standing on a street corner, absolutely terrified to approach a stranger that, quote, whispers in their ear, it tells them that their temporary fear of social embarrassment is completely irrelevant compared to the grave moral injustice of this person living their entire life without hearing this message.
It fundamentally rewrites their risk-reward calculation.
This raises an important question, though. Motivation is great, but how do you ensure this urgency doesn't turn into chaos? Because as any sales director will tell you, raw motivation without a method just creates enthusiastic chaos.
Right, you need a script. You need a method to actually guide the conversation once you engage the stranger. So the text outlines 3 practical steps for overcoming hindrances. Step 1 is giving out tracts. Step 2 is preaching the gospel. Step 3 is inviting and encouraging.
And to help with step 2, the preaching part, the text provides a specific, sequential, scriptural logic.
Yeah, it's referred to as the Bible guide to help you tell someone about Jesus. And it lays out a very tight 4-step progression of verses. And when you look at this 4-step progression, it strips away the mysticism entirely.
It's very mechanical.
It operates exactly like a carefully designed logical proof, or frankly, a masterful corporate sales funnel. Step 1 of the funnel, establish the universal problem. The text instructs the member to use Romans 3.23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, meaning everyone has this core problem, including you and me.
You establish a universal pain point to level the playing field.
Exactly. Step 2, present the stark, unavoidable consequence of ignoring the problem. They use Romans 6.23, the wages of sin is death. The salary for what you are currently doing is absolute destruction.
The ultimate consequence.
Step 3, introduce the exclusive solution to the problem. John 14.6, Jesus saying, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me."
Providing the specific answer.
And finally, step 4, deliver the concrete call to action. Romans 10.9 to 10, stating that if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart, you will be saved.
It is an incredibly efficient, argumentative structure. You have the problem, the consequence, the solution, and the call to action.
It really is a funnel.
By equipping the individual with this prepackaged logical pathway, the organization ensures that the member doesn't have to invent an entire theological argument on the spot while their adrenaline is spiking during a street encounter.
But I have to push back here. It is one thing to have a beautifully designed, airtight script printed in a manual, but humans are not logic circuits. If someone approaches me in a pub or on the street, and within 30 seconds they hit me with, the universal problem is sin and the consequence is death, that doesn't feel like a flawless logical argument to me.
Right. It can come off strong.
It feels like an aggressive, off-putting attack. Does this manual actually account for the emotional intelligence required to deploy this? How do everyday people actually execute this on the street without it falling apart?
That is the ultimate operational test of any manual. Theory is clean, reality is messy. And the text answers your question in its final, most pragmatic chapter.
The ground game.
Yes. Having established the internal psychology, the cellular small group structure, and the argumentative script, the book finally reveals its tactical ground game. It calls this comprehensive deployment strategy Project Andrews.
Project Andrews, named after the biblical figure Andrew from the Gospel of John. The text points to John 1:40, where Andrew hears about the Messiah for the first time, and the very first thing he does is immediately go and find his brother, Simon Peter, to tell him.
He doesn't wait for a training seminar.
Right. He immediately leverages his closest, warmest personal connection.
Project Andrews is the complete operationalization of everything we have discussed. It takes the theory and turns it into highly organized, communal, sustained action. The text outlines the creation of specialized in-house teams responsible for generating all the collateral needed for outreach.
They literally build an internal marketing agency. They have teams dedicated to writing the tracks, producing short narrative stories, creating audiovisual media, and designing special invitations. They control the entire production pipeline.
And once the collateral is produced, they mobilize. The text dictates that once a month, this team runs a service based entirely on evangelism. But crucially, they do not hold this service inside their building, waiting for the multitude to magically appear.
Where do they hold it?
They host these events outside the church walls, in public parks, in local pubs and restaurants. They invade the spaces where the multitude already exists, but they do it with extreme calculated precision.
The deployment strategy is meticulous. They go house to house, 2 by 2, handing out the tracts and invitations. Sending people in pairs is a classic, highly effective accountability and support mechanism. If one person freezes up, the other men step in.
It creates a safety net.
But what I found truly brilliant about Project Andrews is how it handles the members of the community who are simply incapable of doing this.
Yes, the utilization of the stay-behind team.
Because in most organizations, if you aren't the extroverted, charismatic frontline salesperson, you are made to feel entirely useless to the growth of the company. But this text states, quote, "Those who are unable to go for evangelism will stay back in the church and pray for those who go."
It ensures total 100% community involvement. It assigns a vital, active, and respected role to the less extroverted or physically unable members. You aren't benched because you have social anxiety. You are providing the critical artillery support.
You are engaged in the spiritual warfare of prayer that the text established in chapter 1.
And the loop closes when the frontline team returns from the field. The text says that upon returning, people are actively encouraged to testify on their experiences, drawing a parallel to the original disciples who returned happy, reporting their exploits to Jesus.
So they swap stories.
Exactly. They swap stories, they analyze what worked, they boost morale, they celebrate the wins, and process the rejections together.
So what does this all mean? When you look at it, it's the exact same psychological mechanism utilized in high-level grassroots political canvassing. Oh, that's a perfect parallel.
You send volunteers out to knock on doors and collect voter data. But the most important part of the day is when everyone returns to campaign headquarters. You eat pizza, you hype each other up, and you build a shared narrative of struggle and success that bonds the team together.
The comparison to political canvassing is incredibly accurate, especially when you look at how Project Andrews handles the raw data they collect from these street interactions, because this is the part of the text that completely blew me away.
The data privacy protocols?
Yes. For a 2017 church growth manual, the data privacy protocols are astonishing. It is a remarkable display of operational foresight and risk management.
The text mandates the creation of a central unit whose sole job is to monitor and control all the collected emails and phone numbers. It explicitly states in the manual that this centralized system is implemented so as to protect privacy and abuse.
The rules they establish around this are ironclad. Individual members who collect phone numbers or emails out in the field are strictly forbidden from contacting those people directly.
They have to hand it over. They must forward all data to this central unit. Furthermore, every single message, video, or piece of audiovisual media sent to a new contact must be vetted and approved by the central unit, and the communications will only be dispatched from the central unit.
It is literally a modern CRM, a customer relationship management system. Think about what the leadership is accomplishing by centralizing the communication. First, they are guaranteeing absolute brand consistency.
Quality control.
Right. They are ensuring that some overzealous, newly joined member doesn't go home and start aggressively texting bizarre, unapproved theological conspiracy videos to a fragile new contact. The message is vetted, polished, and controlled.
And it protects the people involved.
Second, and more importantly, they are protecting both the congregant and the contact. They are establishing a professional barrier that prevents harassment, stalking, and breaches of privacy.
By centralizing the communication, the church maintains brand consistency and protects the individual. It creates a secure, professional boundary around the inherently messy process of human outreach. That level of systemic control is essential for long-term sustainability.
But the true genius of Project Andrews and the final piece of this entire architectural puzzle is what they do with the contact once communication is established.
Yes, because the text drops a massive warning right at the end. It explicitly states, quote, "The Sunday services will not be enough to establish their faith."
That single line encapsulates the thesis of the entire book. The grand, impressive spectacle is insufficient for human transformation.
So, to ensure the new contact actually integrates and doesn't just become another face in the Sunday multitude, the central headquarters initiates a highly specific follow-up structure. They funnel the new contact into a biweekly Bible study and a biweekly prayer meeting.
This intermediate structure is the bridge. It is specifically designed to transition the new person from the chaotic external outreach event like the pub or the park directly into the internal, intimate 6 to 12 person cellular groups we analyzed earlier.
It is the ultimate realization of the eagle's vision. You start with the 40,000-foot telescopic vision of reaching the city and the park, you capture their attention, you process their data through the CRM, and then you instantly zoom in with microscopic precision.
Plugging them directly into a Tuesday night small group where they absolutely cannot hide. You never, at any point in the process, allow them to become part of an anonymous multitude.
When you step back and synthesize the entire journey of this source text, it operates as a masterclass in balancing organizational paradoxes. It begins by demanding a total psychological rejection of the leader's ego and the intoxicating allure of the massive generic crowd.
It forces the ambitious leader to ground themselves with an intimate, highly structured prayer framework, the ACTS model, to ensure that their actions are driven by empathy rather than ambition.
It constructs a physical, mathematical architecture of cellular microcommunities, that brilliant, non-negotiable 6 to 12 person split, to guarantee that as the organization scales exponentially, the intimacy of the group scales perfectly alongside it.
It engineers a logical, four-step argumentative framework for outreach, empowering its members with a profound moral imperative that completely overrides their natural fear of social rejection.
And finally, it deploys all of this theory into the real world using Project Andrews, a highly structured, data-conscious, meticulously planned ground game that funnels people not into a massive, passive Sunday spectacle, but into a quiet, rigorous, highly accountable, bi-weekly study group.
It is an end-to-end blueprint for building an organization of massive scale that somehow manages to retain the DNA of a tight-knit family. It proves that true sustainable growth does not come from chasing the noise of the multitude or producing the biggest show in town. It comes from the flawless, relentless execution of microscopic relational details, all guided by a telescopic vision of purpose.
It's a really powerful reframing of what it means to build something that lasts.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. Whether you, the listener, are currently trying to scale a tech startup, manage a sprawling nonprofit organization, or just trying to keep a local community project from falling apart, the operational principles layered within this text are incredibly applicable.
There's a lot to learn here, regardless of your field.
The ability to balance that 40,000-foot world-changing vision with the microscopic, unglamorous details of small group dynamics is the ultimate secret to scaling your organization without losing your soul in the process. But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today as you look at your own projects.
What's the final takeaway?
The author of this text made a very bold, countercultural claim at the very end of their operational strategy. They argued that the big, impressive Sunday services, the massive gatherings with the lights and the music, will not be enough to actually establish a foundation in someone's life. The real work, the true, lasting transformation, only happens in the quiet, unglamorous, granular reality of the biweekly follow-up.
That's where the roots grow.
So in a modern world that is completely obsessed with the big Sunday service moments, the grand product launch, the viral TikTok video, the massive conference, the spectacular launch party, what is your equivalent of the Tuesday night biweekly follow-up? Are you relying on the sheer noise and spectacle of the multitude to carry your vision? Or are you actually doing the microscopic cellular work of building the foundation? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.